Welcome again. My name is Maria Miles, and I am on the board of the Hellenic Film Society. Welcome to our annual Film Expo. A little different this year. We've gone digital. If you haven't watched the films, go watch them. They're online through the 20th. It's been a wonderfully exciting week to connect with everyone across the country. We have broken our geographic boundaries. We are all over the country except for California. And this is great. So we're going to kick it off with a wonderful behind the scenes panel today. We are talking with Zacharias Mavroeidis, who is the director of Apostratos, also known as Defunct. Let me introduce myself and then we'll go to the rest of the introductions. As I mentioned, my name is Maria Miles. I'm an entertainment attorney here in New York City. I have worked for the last 2 decades in entertainment law, working with film, music, television, and narrative documentaries. I've represented award-winning filmmakers, and it is a huge passion and pleasure of mine to do what I do. And being a part of the Hellenic Film Society merges 2 of my great passions, being Greek and an entertainment attorney. And so it is so much fun to do this with you today. And the next person I want to introduce is my fellow board member, Stavroula Tosca. And Stavroula, why don't you introduce yourself?
Why don't I do that? Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's a very exciting day for us today because we loved this film, Apostratos, Defunct. My name is Stavroula Tosca. I'm on the board of directors for the Hellenic Film Society USA. And I'm also a filmmaker and original content creator, writer, director, and on occasion, actress based in New York City and pretty much going between LA and New York. Let's get to the guest of honor, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Zacharias Mavroeidis. Where do I begin this introduction? Zacharias was born in Athens, in Greece. He went on to study architecture at the Thessaloniki University, Aristotelio, and then he moved on to theater, and then he decided he was going to do filmmaking. His debut feature film, the comedy The Guide, back in 2012-11, some of you may know it as Oxenagos. It screened in more than 20 film festivals all around the world. In 2014, he had his first novel, because he's also a novelist, 9 Lives Left, Enya Zoes Ehun Mini, published in Greece. In 2018, he completed Across Her Body, a highly acclaimed documentary that follows a fading religious tradition on the island of Thracia, or Thracia, correct me if I'm wrong, Zacharia.
It's both ways.
It's both ways, okay. So the island of Thracia. And his sophomore feature, Defunct, Apostratos, that we're gonna talk about today, premiered at the prestigious international competition of the 60th Thessaloniki International Film Festival. And not only it premiered there in 2019, but it also won the prestigious Fischer Audience Award and the award for Best Picture. Zacharia, I can go on and on and on about Berlinale and Cuba and Madrid and Sarajevo and my goodness, Efta Psyches στο Stoma, I think that's the latest book that you published by Polaris Editions in Greece.
Actually, I've only published 1 book, and that's the Greek title. Efta Psyches στο Stoma is the Greek title of 9 Lives Left.
So από 9 ζωές γίνανε 7 ψυχές. Okay, θα πρέπει να το συζητήσουμε αυτό.
It's a book about cats. So in Greece we say that cats have 7 lives, while in English culture, cats have 9 lives. So that's why
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
The number.
It all makes sense now. Zacharia, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Why don't we start with you telling us, how do you go from studying architecture at the Thessaloniki Aristotle University to becoming a filmmaker?
It was a progressive change. While I was studying and even before in high school, I always enjoyed writing. I used to write theater plays which we performed with friends and then later with colleagues at the university. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I was at a playwriting seminar, and the tutors told me that, you know, this thing you're writing is not a theater play, it's a film script. So maybe you should think about filmmaking. And that's how I started working as I picked up a class of fundamentals of filmmaking, And as soon as I finished architecture, I found a job as a scriptwriter in Greek TV. So while I was studying filmmaking, I was working as a scriptwriter, and progressively I ended up doing films.
That's an interesting path. And then coming to Defunct today, what led to the making of this story, to the telling and making of this film?
The initial spark, let's say, came from watching a theater play that dealt with the Greek crisis, and it was telling the story of a young guy who due to the crisis, he was like bankrupt, and he suffered all this thing. And he said that the thing that was most painful to him was the fact that he, without realizing, he found himself completely changing his social circle. That in order to, when you go bankrupt and you're jobless, you end up hanging around with other people who are in a similar situation, and this brings along several sentimental factors, like you end up being with people who are kind of depressed or kind of in a dead end, and somehow this recycles itself as a state of mind. So this was something that created a spark in my head. And at the same time, during the early years of the crisis, it was a very common phenomenon that people in their 30s who used to have, let's say, a kind of independent life, they couldn't support their houses anymore. So at the same time, their families might have a father that was left by their grandfather who was dead, or the grandmother. So all these young modern people with their gadgets and all the things, they move into their grandparents' house as a temporary solution. So this weird meeting of these young defeated people with their gadgets moving into these really old-fashioned and kind of like museum-like houses, which were strange, but at the same time they were very intimate because it was their grandparents' house. So this was also something that was really in the core of the film, like this weird meeting of someone who is in his 30s and he's suddenly awfully defeated, and he moves inside the house of an absent grandparent, which, at least for people who are more or less in my age, the grandparents are more or less the generation of the Second World War. So this generation is not any generation, it has a very strong identity as being the heroic, patriotic, not only in Greece, but across the world. Mm-hmm. So this conflict of a defeated 30-year-something modern boy or girl moving into the absent hero's house is somehow, for me, it was very rich as a situation to explore.
I found that dichotomy really interesting because I love history and I love these old things, but I particularly like how he enters, for those of you who haven't seen the film, it's a young man who has to go back and live in his grandfather's home and discovers many things about his family and his grandfather. But what was particularly interesting is here's a young man with all the modern gadgets of the world, but he finds a certain level of quiet. I found that quiet and silence played a little bit in the film, and it actually made it very comforting that silence was part of Papu's house. And he actually starts to appreciate some of Papu's things. Can you talk about how what inspired you to write this story specifically, and how you found those moments of silence and how it really took us into Papu's environment?
I mean, I think silence goes along with moments of solitude in the film. So the film gives a lot of space to see the character alone. And I also had this in my previous film, in Zacharias, the Guide. And I think it wasn't a conscious decision. Somehow, these things come out naturally, and then maybe you meditate on them. I mean, I've meditated on them. So my conclusion was that because both the Guide and the Defunct deal in their core with the theme of identity. So you have a main character who interacts with different aspects, with different kinds of people, like with his friends, or with a girlfriend, or with his mother, or with a friend of his grandfather. So through this interaction, you see different faces of himself. When you see someone all alone, it's for me, it's a very interesting situation to see how he performs himself when he's all alone. So you see him, how he performs himself as a son, how he performs himself as a lad, or how he performs himself as a, I don't know, businessman.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always, for me, it's really interesting to see how we act when we are all alone and when we only perform ourselves to ourselves. I don't know if this makes any sense, but
yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
I find that especially in a time with, you know, the explosion of social media, the last 10, 15 years or so, where everyone feels, well, not everyone, but the majority of people around the world feel a need to show a certain type of lifestyle and an image to the outside world, you know, just using their phone constantly. So I thought that was really interesting. Without, in your film, you know, going into this, you know, the trick of social media, we see this guy in and out of that environment, in and out, and how the
Yeah.
switch takes place. And I think that a lot of us can relate with that at any age.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people perform themselves since ever, but social media have, you know, made this extremely bold and obvious how we try to portray a certain image of ourselves through all these platforms.
Yeah.
And I just found it really funny with all the machines in Papu's house. Kind of cracked me up. How did you come up with the title?
The title was, the Greek title, I don't know, it was there ever since the beginning, and somehow it has a double sense because it means literally someone who is out of the military, who used to be in service and now he's not. So this has to do with his grandfather's history, who was somehow thrown out of the military because he wasn't right-wing enough for the military. This is the backstory. But also, the title has also a metaphorical meaning because the main character, the grandson, he's somehow thrown out of his military, let's say the lifestyle of South Athens, Lipara, nightlife, gym, etc. So he couldn't afford this. So somehow he also feels like he was kicked out of the playground. So it has this dual meaning. The English title was an idea of Christos Kostadakopoulos, the producer of the film, who is really good in English, because I must admit I hardly knew the word. I had to Google it and I was puzzled. But it's also nice because it has also a dual meaning. And I really like the fact that it's an adjective that you can use it for objects. So because gadgets they're a big part of the story. So how the gadgets of the grandson meet the old gadgets of the grandparent and how these two fight together.
Yeah. Zacharias, one of the things that I truly appreciated in the film was the presence of the past in everyday life, not just because of the environment and the production design, which I thought was really wonderful, but also the secrets of the family, the talking about the left, and then, you know, politically, meaning the old photos, the comments of, you know, the main characters' friends when they're playing basketball and whatnot, about the Papu, the grandfather being in the left and then in the right. And again, those secrets of the past that are still very much present, whether we realize it or not. Tell us a little bit, you know, what do you think of the situation? Were you able, I guess the question is, how were you able to just draw the line, but do it in such a delicate and intelligent and respectful way without, you know, beating a dead horse, but showing how much what has happened, you know, 50, 60, 70 years ago is still very present in the younger generation's minds as well?
The path to history was a personal path. So the main character starts as completely ignorant of his family's history and his grandfather's in particular. So it's his personal need to find a new, how do you call this? Like something to look up to. So he might be looking up to Brad Pitt until the recent past, you know, like to lifestyle people and rich and beautiful. But now he's failed this prototype, this role model, and we see him in this weird crisis of trying to find a new model to look up to. So as this need brings this need along with the fact that he is in his grandfather's house, brings him towards his grandfather. So he wants to discover who his grandfather was. Basically, he wants to be like his grandfather. He wants to be worthy of his name. So this leads him to discover who his grandfather was. So history is it's really important part of the story, but at the same time, it's not a historical thing. There is no flashback. We don't see anything from the past. So, and the main character he collects certain information, but throughout the story, but the most important journey he does is a sentimental one, to grow out of his past self, of being obsessed with the gadgets and with the money and being successful and being so. Yeah, for me that was the path to history. It's a personal, and also throughout this path, the grandfather as a constructed hero turns progressively into a human. Because I think that's the thing with history, that historic events and situations, in order to survive through time, have a tendency to turn into mythology somehow. So there are contradicting elements, contradicting events, contradicting character traits tend to be shadowed and left out in order to create a coherent narrative, a coherent hero, a coherent story that can be archetypical and resonate throughout the past and serve its role, not exactly as a historical fact, but as a mythology, actually.
Yeah.
There's tremendous growth in this character, like throughout the arc of the film. And it's very nice to see the person he becomes at the end, actually.
Yeah.
We
don't want to spoil it for anybody.
No.
Mary, I don't know about you. I still have like a bunch of questions, but I don't know if we're getting any questions from our audience, or if we want to continue asking questions ourselves. Because
if there are questions from our audience, please you can ask the question under the Q&A button, and I will go over there and ask your question. If not, we will just continue chatting because we have tons of more questions for Zacharias. Stavroula, actually, when we were discussing
I just want to add can I add something for the audience? Because I know we were chatting and maybe it sounds like things are really serious, but the film also has a lot of self-sarcasm, and there's a lot of tenderness and humor about this whole story is not like a hard-boiled drama. It's more of there's a sarcasm and some tenderness towards the whole story, and there are plenty of dialogues that are vivid and funny. Yeah.
I found myself laughing out loud, actually, and we should say that, quite a few times. And then, the Greek language, we're bragging now a little bit, but it's just so incredibly rich, and there's so many different ways to say something, and, to play with the irony and the sarcasm and whatnot, that sometimes I'm like, how do you even really translate this in English? But again, it was like such a fine balance that you hit with the emotions, with the humor, with the drama, with those very special moments, and how they were spread out throughout the film. So it makes sense that it picked up, the awards that it did, and that it's been getting that recognition. How's that helped, by the way? Premiering at the Thessaloniki International Film Festival, winning the Fischer Audience Award and the Best Picture Award, has that helped with the film receiving attention in the European market, the international market, in Greece?
Yeah, well, the thing is, we had the coronavirus thing that canceled most of the film festivals that the film was supposed to screen during this time. Among others, I would be in New York in June for your festivals, and I would be in LA and several others. On the positive side, we had the chance to screen the film in theaters here for 3 weeks before the lockdown. I'm sure we would have done way more tickets, because after the second week of our screening, already the thing was coming into Greece, so people were scared to go to theaters. I don't know, the whole thing with the lockdown was a problem to everyone. I'm not sure what is worse, if it's worse that you screened and then you missed the rest of the screening, if it's worse if you missed your world premiere, if it's worse if you were about to shoot your film and it was cancelled. So it's a nightmare for everyone. So yes, somehow the lockdown intervened with the festival career of the film. However, we did have these 3 weeks, so the film has created a really nice word of mouth here in Greece with a very also with a very diverse crowd. Just want to correct something. We got the 2 awards we won in Thessaloniki. One was the Audience Award for Best Film, and the other film, Best Film, wasn't the official Best Film award. Was an award that was given by a youth jury from students from the university. And just to say that the film was also appreciated by really young people, like in the early 20s. Yeah. So it's somehow the film. I mean, the biggest challenge of the film was to blend together storylines that somehow could be independent, like the interaction that the main character has with old friends he finds, which turns into like a teenage boy gang. And at the same time, on the side of it, he gets to meet the friend of his grandfather, and through that he gets closer and closer to his grandfather. So somehow there's a balance in the film between these two. And hopefully this created the space for a really diverse audience to get into the film. And
this is what's interesting about that, because just playing, I watched it twice myself and I enjoyed it just as much both times. But as I hear you speaking and I'm playing it over my head, and you see this in some of the stills, the photos from the making of the film, someone in their 20s can sit down and watch and enjoy this film. Someone in their 40s, 50s, or even in the 70s can enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is. And since a lot of us have gone back home during this lockdown and watching, have to be around our families more so than before, a family of, the grandparents, the parents, and the children watching this film all together is, it's such a treat. And it's one of the first things that I remember Jimmy Dimitrov, the founder of the Hellenic Film Society USA, just so excited when he first saw the film and he reached out to all of us. I hope we can get it. So we're very happy that we got it.
I'm happy you got it.
Thank you. Mary, I see we have a couple of questions from our audience.
Yes, we have a couple of questions. So the first one is, can you tell us a bit more about the history of Papagou? And well, I'm going to add to it, why did you choose that neighborhood?
Papagou is a very, very particular suburb of Athens. It's quite close to the center. It was built in the 1950s. It was built right after the end of the Greek Civil War. And it was built by Papagou. Papagou was an army general. He then turned into a politician who fought in the Second World War, but also he fought a lot during the Greek Civil War. So he arranged for this suburb to be built in order to give houses to families of army people serving in the army that had served the country during all these years. So it's a kind of like a garden city, which is a really rare in Greece. I don't know whoever knows Greece and Athens. Generally, urbanization of Athens and all Greece is completely spontaneous and anarchic. So this is a suburb that's really clean cut with a lot of parks and everything. And also it's a very weird suburb because everyone who lives there has someone in the army in their past. So I also had a grandfather who was in the army who lived in Papagou, so there's a bit of autobiographical elements there. So I had this experience of every now and then my parents would drop me there for weekends. So I always had this feeling that whenever we turned the traffic light and entered the Papagou area, it was as if you entered a different world. It was quiet, it was desert, and all these weird old houses that looked alike. Yeah, it's a very unique place for Greece. It's worth a visit.
So we have another question. It says, for a long time after the Civil War, Greeks were unwilling to talk about the conflicts between the left and the right. Is Greek society today more open to this type of discussion?
That's a very difficult question. Well, first of all, for many years after the Civil War, there was a very, from the winners' side, that were persecuted and they were in exile camps throughout the 50s and 60s. Only for a few years in the 60s, people from the left were not in the concentration camps. I don't remember how they I don't know how exactly to translate them. So only after the end of the junta did the left start to get a part in the public speech and give their own narrative of what has happened. And I think still we don't really talk about it as much as we should, and it's a very complicated issue, extremely complicated. It's not a historical film. I wish to retell story, to the history, to say my own view of history. My intention as a filmmaker was to focus on the human side of history. And I go back to what I said earlier, that historical events, when they survive through time, tend to turn into mythology, and real people turn into heroes. So for me, the idea was to scratch behind this constructed surface and see what could be behind that.
Yeah. And the other thing is about that period in Greece, which we
Is there more questions from the audience?
We have a couple more, yeah. But I was going to say that it's people who were not willing to talk about this part of history, but also people who have been extremely afraid to openly discuss this part of history because they knew there would be consequences for their children, for their grandchildren. And it's just unfortunate. And these are things that, exist all around the world and in Greece, of course. Zacharias, people, and we as well, want to know about the next projects that you're working on. So what do you have in the works?
I have a feature comedy that I'm writing now, and now at the very early process of finding a producer, how to make a low budget film. It's also a film about filmmaking. And I also have a way more ambitious project on the side, which has to do with a book you mentioned at the beginning, which is the book. I mean, when I started writing this book, I was hoping to turn it into an animation feature film, because it's a story that takes place in a Greek island where all these stray cats that everybody meets when they visit the islands. And so the idea is what happens with all these cats when all the tourists and all the free food that comes along leave at the end of the summer. So it's a story that follows a group of cats after the summer is over at their survival adventure, and the main character is a cat who is determined that she needs to find a man to adopt her. So now I'm in the very early.
You love cats.
Yes, I love cats. I think they're very interesting animals. Yes.
They sure are. They're fascinating animals. You've been very generous with your time, and we appreciate it. We have questions that keep coming in, but what it's important for us to say is that the Greek Film Expo on Demand, the first ever in the US, is running until July 20th, which is Monday, 11:45 p.m. at night, Eastern Time. And whoever hasn't watched Defunct, Apostratos yet, we couldn't recommend it highly enough. So check it out, find out information on HellenicFilmUSA.org. And Zacharias, tell us, for people who have joined us from all around the world for this wonderful interview, please tell us where they can find the film at this point outside of the US and the Hellenic Film Society screenings.
The film is going to screen in a film festival in Romania, in Transylvania Film Festival at the beginning of August. And it's going to play around Greece during August and also July. I'm not sure of any screenings abroad. I think it's going to play. I think the LA Greek Film Festival will do a similar event like yours, like online screening. I think the film will play there. But yeah, I don't know much more. But we have a Facebook page where Apostratos Defunct, which people who want to follow up our future screenings can like, and there they can see all the info.
We look forward to your future work, because we love this film.
What are the chances we can fit in one more question that I had and some of our audience members have, and it's a really good one, I think.
It is.
Zacharias, how do you get to decide if a story is going to be a short film, a documentary, a feature film, or a book, or an animation film? What is it that, you know, makes the separation happen in your head as a filmmaker and a writer?
I mean, when I start to write a story, it's going to be a fiction, so it's not going to be a documentary. I have a short experience with documentary, but in that case, my experience was somehow the theme and the characters found me, and I couldn't resist them. So, and then progressively turned into a certain story. With the book, it was a very funny accident, and because I didn't intend to write a book. I was trying to write a script for an animation film, but somehow I got. I think when you are script writing a lot for many years, there's script writing is so strict, and so you cannot use many adjectives. You always think of the production side of it. You cannot do that. You cannot do the other. So you're writing at the same time. You have, you know, the producer here and the director here. You know, they're all, you know, dictating censorship. So I think that through writing this book, I felt the need to, you know, to do the blockbuster, you know, to write whatever I wanted to write. So it was really spontaneous, and I'm not sure how it happened actually.
Life is good when you're able to write whatever you want to write. So we hope that it continues to be that way for you. And we have no doubt you're going to continue to create really wonderful films. You have friends in New York and around the US. You have friends at the Hellenic Film Society USA, and we're always happy to promote your work. Everybody follow Zacharias and Defunct Apostratos on Facebook for updates. Again, check out HellenicFilmUSA.org for the remaining 3 days of our expo, where you can watch Apostratos and other really, really wonderful and very well curated films. Zacharia, σε ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Να είστε καλά. Καλή επιτυχία.